listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. This podcast is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are cheating on their partners make decisions that are truly right for them. I also work with clients who have been cheated on. And if you're in that situation, you may find today's conversation especially helpful. On this show, we feature tools and guidance from my coaching practice, as well as advice from other professionals whose work pertains to the sometimes complicated business of human romantic relationships. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Dorothy Johnson. Dorothy is a heartbreak coach, and she helps women get over their exes, forgive and let go, and stop obsessing about the relationship that's ended so that they can start focusing their energy on creating an amazing future for themselves. Dorothy loves helping her clients let go of pain, anger, and resentment and step into empowerment, self-confidence, and excitement about the future. Dorothy wants you to know that turning your pain into power is totally possible, but it doesn't just take time, quote unquote. It requires your active participation. To learn more about Dorothy and her work, go to dorothyabjohnson.com. And of course, that information will be in the show notes. Before we start talking about heartbreak, this episode is brought to you by me, Marie Murphy, PhD. I provide shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental relationship coaching. You can talk to me about all the things that seem too messy or weird or stigmatized to share with your best friend or your spouse or even your therapist, including but not limited to matters related to infidelity. To learn more about me and how we can work together, go to mariemurphyphd.com. Dorothy, it's so great to talk with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited. This topic is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I just am so pumped to be here with you, an expert in it, and chit chat all things infidelity. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Yay. All right, let's talk. I mean, this is kind of basic, but it's so important. Let's talk about why heartbreak is such a thing. Why is heartbreak so painful?
Yes, I love this question. Obviously, I get it a lot. So my basic kind of one-liner to tell you in this sort of situation is really that heartbreak is so painful because of the stories that we have tied to the relationship, to the breakup, to the person that we are no longer with. And just like a little bit of background on myself and what that kind of looked like was I was in a 7-year relationship with someone, and he broke up with me over the phone while I was away from our home on a business trip in a different state. And he ended up moving on really quickly. And so when he moved on very quickly from that relationship, I remember making it mean, he never loved me. And that was the story that played on repeat in my brain for so long. And that's what was creating so much pain for me. And I really didn't know that it was a story that was optional for me. I totally thought like that was just 100% fact. Like clearly, how could you love someone and do that? How could you love someone and move on that quickly? When in reality, there are no rules, right? There are no rules on how quickly you can or should move on. And also, just to say he moved on doesn't mean that he didn't love me while he moved on. It doesn't mean he didn't love me while we were in the relationship, all of that. So once I realized that that was an optional story, I was playing on repeat in my brain, and that was what was creating so much pain for myself. I was able to let go of that story and move on from that relationship and get over my ex. Now, I think the fascinating part about that is that journey took me 1.5 years. Because I was trying to do all the things that Google provided me, right? I was like, I gotta wait for time to go. I know, right? I'm like, oh, it takes time to heal your heart. I need to travel. I need to love myself harder, all of the things. And so I was trying to do all of that. But what was really happening is I wasn't changing that story in my brain. So because the story didn't change, it didn't really matter how much time went by. If my story didn't change, my feelings didn't change, right?
Yeah, totally. Totally. And I mean, I just want to call out the fact that there are so many available stories in our society about how relationships are, what love is all about, what a breakup means or doesn't mean, like all of the things. And when we believe that stuff, it becomes our operating system or our story. And if we believe that that stuff is true, it impacts our lives in measurable ways. And it's not, and like you said, like if we don't change our story, it doesn't matter how much time goes by. We can keep hitting that auto repeat button for the rest of our lives if we want to.
Yes. 100%.
For better or worse.
Yeah, right.
So let's talk about, since this show is about infidelity, let's talk about dealing with breakups that occur in the context of one partner's infidelity or deception of some sort or some other kind of bad behavior, quote unquote. Talk about how this happens with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely deal with both sides of the infidelity coin, right? So I have clients who come to me who were cheated on and they're just distraught and they feel the betrayal and they're having a hard time moving on because of a lot of the same story that I was telling myself of like, they didn't love me. If they cheated on me, then it means all these things about me. I wasn't good enough. They didn't want to fight for me, all of that.
Yeah.
And then I've also seen the other side of the coin where the person did the cheating and then the relationship ended and they have so much guilt and they have so much regret and they have so much resentment built up towards themselves.
Right.
And they have a hard time letting that go or letting go of the idea that the cheating makes them a bad person.
Yep. Sure.
And so, of course, the way that I address this with my clients is I really hone in on the idea that cheating's neutral, that cheating is absolutely a neutral thing that happens. It's someone's actions. And it doesn't mean that we have to feel neutral about it. Just recognizing that we don't have any feelings about cheating until we associate a story to it, until we associate our thoughts to it. Right.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that too, is looking at what you're making the cheating mean about you.
Yeah, totally. Let me just pause you and call that out because this is something I talk about too, of course.
Okay.
Like, we have so many shared understandings about what infidelity means in our society. And there's a lot of blame placed on people who cheat. And we just believe that that's true a lot of the time. And we internalize that idea and believe that that has to be our truth. But that's not how it works. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that believe a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that all of that stuff is true just because we'll agree upon those ideas.
Ooh, I'm glad you pointed that out. Totally. I'm so glad that you said that because 100% it doesn't, just because a collective amount of human beings believe we could even look at an analogy for that is looking at like Henry Ford and the engine that he built. The collective group of individuals said that wasn't possible. His engineers said it wasn't possible, but yet it was. So it's same thing about even like any concept doesn't have to be real for you just because it's real for other human beings.
Right.
And honestly, when you are the person who cheated and the relationship ends because of that, it's such an amazing moment to look at what thought errors were already there and weren't going to be changed without that having happened.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I simply had a thought error that led to a feeling that led to the action of infidelity. And do I still align with that? Maybe I do and maybe I don't, and neither is right or wrong.
Yep. Totally.
And then when it comes to being the person that's cheated on, I've done, and I do want to just preface all of everything that I'm saying. I've been on both sides of cheating. I have done the cheating. I have been cheated on, totally have been and seen both sides of it. So I'm here for all of it.
Yeah.
But one example that's coming to mind is after pre the work that I came into, pre-thought work, right? When I realized thoughts created feelings. And feelings created actions. The way that I thought about cheating was I definitely was someone who subscribed to the idea that it's not good and that it means that I wasn't enough for you.
Yeah.
And post thought work, I don't even know if you would consider this cheating, and it's so funny too. That's like a whole other conversation we could have because there's so many definitions of what is cheating.
Right.
But I had a significant other post thought work who had signed into his Twitter, or not Twitter, I'm sorry, Tinder. I'm so good at these apps, clearly. He signed into his Tinder account. And I remember like seeing it on his phone being like, oh my gosh, why were you
What
on
are you
Tinder?
doing?
Yeah.
Right.
And this was post thought work. And it was so fun and like fascinating to look at for me on how I handled that after I realized that it had nothing to do with me. Like him being on Tinder legitimately had nothing to do with me. And being able to experience that was totally different, where it was like, I could see the thought differences, right? Like pre thought work, I would have thought, oh my gosh, I'm not enough for you. So that's why you're on Tinder versus this time. I'm like, oh my gosh, what were you feeling? What made you want to go on Tinder? And he's like, well, I was feeling really unloved. I'm like, oh my gosh, why? Why were you feeling unloved? And he was like, well, because I felt like you didn't love me anymore. And I'm like, that makes so much sense, right? If you're thinking she doesn't love me anymore and you feel unloved, the way he was handling that was trying to find love elsewhere, which makes total sense. And it doesn't mean that I agreed with his actions or anything like that, but it did mean that I could understand it and hold compassion for it.
Yeah.
And just recognize like his actions truly had nothing to do with me. And maybe there were ways that I wanted to express love differently in the future, or maybe not.
Yeah, sure. Totally. Love all that. Love all that. And I think, you said something that I think is so important to point out over and over and over again, which is we can understand where someone's coming from and still not be cool with the behavior. It's just about like stepping back and being able to say like this is happening. Like you can't dislike this out of happening. That's just not how it works. Now that like you can make a choice, like how do you want to proceed? But I don't want to get too far into that tangent. So let's bring it back to like, there's been an acrimonious breakup. You're the party who's been hurt. We love to create stories about how justified we are in feeling hurt or resentment or anger or pain, et cetera, et cetera. Where can we go from there?
That's such a great question. I think the first thing that obviously I believe really truly has to happen is you have to justify that for yourself. You have to validate all of that pain and all of that hurt. You have to say, you know what? Of course I'm angry. Of course I'm frustrated. And I'm going to allow myself to be there. I've had clients in the past where they don't want to feel angry.
Right. Oh yeah.
Right. Like they want to be out of the anger.
Yeah.
And I totally get that. But to get out of the anger, you're going to have to go through it. As cliche as that sounds.
No, it's absolutely true.
Right? Like you have to go through the anger, and there's multiple ways to do that, but really embodying emotions. I talk to my clients about release writing and being able to right away, just like sit down and like write, if this emotion could speak, what would it say? And allow that all to come out and rip it up and throw it away. And then doing like a grief bubble exercise where it's really looking at like, what are all the emotions that are being tied up into this one scenario and what's creating them. And there's a number of ways to feel that anger and feel it all the way through and justify it and remind yourself that entire time, I'm allowed to feel angry about this.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. No, I think I'm so glad you said that. I see this with most of the people that I work with, even if infidelity isn't a part of the situation. And in addition to allowing ourselves to feel our feelings, I also emphasize that it's really important to let yourself have the story that you have for a minute. Like you've got to be able to start right where you are and be okay. Like this is what I currently believe to be true. Like they shouldn't have cheated on me. They're a lying, stinking jerk, or like they did me wrong. Like it's fine to start there.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because 100%. And like give yourself that story. It's almost like a gift you give it, but like 100%. I think it's so important to just recognize like, it shouldn't be that way, but it was. So now what?
Right. Exactly. And so that is, that's where we're going. You can't frog to that. You can't jump over all the like anger, anguish, all the messy, hard feelings to get to like, okay, this happened. Now what? But that is the point. That is the work of coaching.
And I feel like that's the whole concept and idea around of, we're not just making this into a positive situation. Like we're not just posting a positive sticky note over a negative situation. We're finding the neutrality of the situation and then deciding what we want to make it mean. And you can't find the neutrality until you've felt the anger and validated your own story.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So what does the journey look like? Like, I see this with my clients, but talk about what this looks like with yours, getting from like, I'm a victim and I don't want to believe that I'm not a victim to, the future of something different.
Yeah. So, I would describe this in the most simple way that there's 3 simple steps. So we've got to feel our feelings, pretty much everything we just talked about in that scenario where it's like, you've got to allow yourself to experience the emotions.
Yeah.
And this isn't something that just happens. It's a skill set that you practice in terms of getting comfortable feeling discomfort and recognizing that you're not going to die.
Right.
And right.
Yeah.
Learning how to sit in that discomfort and learning how to find the calm and the peace within the uncomfortable emotions. And that for my clients takes about 3 to 4 weeks. So we do that for like the first portion of working together. And then after they've like validated all their emotions, learned how to allow emotions instead of react, resist, or avoid those emotions, that's when the whole journey around creating closure starts to happen. And for one of my clients to create closure, they have to find themselves first. They have to build that relationship with themselves first. And so that looks like learning, oh my gosh. So now that I'm like over like the hurt part of it all, like what actually happened and why did those things happen? And did I like them or did I not like them? Who am I? How can I show up for myself above anyone or anything else? And then rewriting their breakup story is what I call it. So going through the process of, what's the story that I've been telling myself for the past number of weeks or years or whatever? And how do I feel when I'm telling that story to myself? How do I feel when I tell that story to others? And then doing like background research and looking at like, what might my ex's story of the same situation be? And what story is actually going to serve me in like wrapping up this whole chapter of my life and is going to like propel me forward? What story can I tell myself that is just as equally as true as this other story, right? We're not taking away any pain.
Right.
All the pain was still there, but we're learning how to create closure by making decisions on what we want to choose to believe about ourselves, about that relationship, and about our ex in a way that serves us and propels us forward. And then that leads us into the last piece of focusing on your future. So learning how to spend more time crafting and creating versus describing the past.
I love that.
Right? Because I have so many clients who are like, but my past is everything that I wanted. And I'm like, that is so great that you know that that's what you want.
Yeah.
But now we get to go out and we get to craft that and we get to create that. And the analogy that I like to use there is talking about you're literally creating like this big, beautiful, epic sundae. And that way, when your new partner comes to join you, it's just the cherry on top. And he or she is just the cherry on top. And if that cherry rolls off the sundae, no big deal because you're left with this beautiful, epic, amazing sundae still. And that is kind of what I'm all about when it comes to creating the life that you wanted with your ex, but on your own. So no one can ever take it away. And that's like what we focus on at the end of the program is like the last 4 weeks is how do I actually go out and create that? How do I become the person who has that life?
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. I definitely see so many folks who are, stuck in paralysis through analysis, trying to like understand the meanings of the past and like, what did the breakup mean? And like, what do I need to learn from this? And that, there's a time and place for some of that, but that can quickly spiral out of control and go nowhere helpful.
I feel like that's like fix it energy. So that's what I call it with my clients. And like, it's like you're trying to fix something that's not necessarily broken.
I love that. That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you never want to like grow and get better and like learn what you could have done differently in that relationship. But when you come at it from, I need to fix something that's broken versus I just want to get better at this. So next time's different. Two different energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. What do you do when you have clients who are like, they're getting their groove back, like they're healing, they're moving forward, and then their ex comes crawling back?
Happens so often.
Yeah.
Well, and when you think about it, like when you're really growing and you're putting yourself first and you're building out your life and you're finally getting excited about the future again, that's when you're like so attractive.
Exactly.
Like I'm so attracted to people who are just like in their own bones, loving themselves so much.
Yep.
So it always makes sense to me that exes come back. And of course, people will come in, they're like, man, that's never going to happen. And then they do.
Yeah.
So they, so this comes up as a part of the program where you're learning how to make decisions as future you, right? You have to learn how to show up and make decisions from a place where you already have everything you want.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Right. So when you learn that process and you are fully in your bones, loving your life, regardless of who's in it or not in it, it's really easy to make decisions. You feel very clear. You feel very confident. You feel very certain about the decisions you're making. You feel secure in who you are and what you want. And it makes that decision-making process so much easier. So sometimes the ex will come back and the client will say, oh my gosh, I love all the work that I'm doing. I feel really solid and certain in this. And I want to try this relationship again. Awesome. Cool. Go for it. Right. You have all these new tools. You have this new skill set. You are a different person, which means your relationship will be different.
Yep.
And then sometimes they're like, I feel like I've outgrown what I thought I want. Like I thought I wanted him, but like what he was and who he is today is not the person that I want to be in a relationship with. So I think I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go back to that relationship. But that decision obviously is 100% theirs. And they know what is right and what's wrong for themselves. And like, that's what's important to me is that they make that decision. They feel very solid, secure, and confident in knowing what's best for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think two things are really important to emphasize here. One is that anything's possible. Sometimes relationships that have ended do come back together and it's wonderful. And, that is dependent upon your changes, not on your partner checking different boxes necessarily, although that can certainly be part of it, but it's about starting with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's also, I would just want to say one more thing about that is, I've personally been doing a lot of work around attachment versus commitment.
Ooh, let's talk about that.
Towards things that I want in my life. And that is one thing that I've noticed within my clients, my brave hearts, is that when you get to that place and you're not attached to a specific human being, but you are actually more committed to the relationship that you actually want, or more committed to just being the human that you want to be, that is when I see exes come back, is because you've let go of all attachment to that person. Yeah. And you've made space for you to just show up in your own kind of essence. Does that make sense?
Oh my God. Yes. No, of course it makes sense. And I love it that you're saying all of this. And I also want to hammer on another point here. This whole notion of like being committed to having love in your life, having partnership in your life, having a romantic relationship is so different from being attached to the idea that this one person has to be your person.
Yeah. So important. So important. Because if that one person had to be that person, they would be.
Boom. I completely agree. And I think, I don't know if you see this, but I certainly see people in the moment of like a relationship starting to dissolve or officially dissolving. People just don't want to believe that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I always ask in those moments, I ask like, is there a downside to believing that? Like, is it like, what is your brain afraid of happening?
Yeah.
Right. What will happen if you believe that this person will be with me if they're supposed to be? And if they're not, then they're not the person. And that kind of helps you explore what that story is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we're also attached to the idea of comfort from certainty to some, some of us more than others, of course. So I often see a big element of that at times too, the fear of the unknown versus the discomfort of a relationship that isn't going so well sometimes seems worse.
Yes. And that's where I would ask everyone who's listening, if you have that, because I used to be the same exact way. Uncertainty was terrifying. Like I just wanted when I talk about like the relationship that catapulted my breakup coaching business, I always talk about like, I wanted him to marry me so that I was certain we would last forever.
Ooh, that's so good. Yeah.
Right. And and one of the things that I think is so important to think about is trust. trust. And I have a trust in, like, when I describe trust to people, I describe it as 3 different layers. So you have a trust for a higher power. So whether that's God or the universe or whatever, when you have a trust in the higher power to course correct for your mistake and make sure that everything's going exactly the way it needs to go behind the scenes, it like releases so much pressure from myself. And then it allows me to have trust in myself to show up and be the person that I need to be, and always like get back up when I fall back down and all of that. And then once I have a trust in a higher power and in myself, I get to just trust other humans to show up, and it just makes everything so much easier. And so when we talk about uncertainty, I always think it's so great to have uncertainty in my life, because then that is when like the gifts start to like pop in from the universe. That's when like the magic happens. Because if there was certainty, there would be no magic.
Oh my God.
There would be no
so good.
surprises, right? So that's why it's so important to have trust at the same time as the uncertainty, because then you can just trust that the universe is giving you something bigger and better than what you had in your past in a way that you just even know. Like, an example of that, right, is this breakup. It truly was life-changing. Like, I was devastated. I was a hot mess. I was devastated. It was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I wanted so badly in my life was just ripped away from me and handed to someone else. That's how I felt. And little did I know, 5 years later, I would be running a business called Breakup Coach Dorothy because of that event. And that was bigger and better than anything I could have ever even imagined at the time. Right.
Yeah.
And so the more you see this happen in your life and the more you focus on how that happens in your life, the more events you're going to find like that support and back up the idea that the universe is totally taking care of all of the things.
Yeah.
So if you can trust, even when it's uncertain, that's where the magic will happen in your life.
Oh, I love how you put all of that. I used to talk about trust versus control, and how when we're scared of uncertainty, we tend to try to control things.
Yeah.
And how does that work out for us? Well, we might get partway down the road with that approach, but it generally doesn't get us more of what we want. It's not what we really want.
Yeah. Because then we're trying to control things we can't control. And that's really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is. It's terrible. It creates just energetic stagnation or constipation. It's not like a way to get more of what you want in life. And I love how you just described, uncertainty actually being, the conduit to magic, or the channel for magic to occur. Cool. On that note, this is a great transition to the topic I want to talk about next, which is dealing with all of the logistical, financial, material changes that can come at the end of a relationship, splitting up households, co-parenting, all the things. And let's make sure we also talk about, when you're quote unquote stuck living in the same household with your partner after you've decided to break up.
Okay. So the one thing I need any listener who's listening to this right now who might be experiencing this, I need you to do. I need you to believe harder than anything that all of your circumstances are going to be better than what they are now. And truly like live in that belief. And the way that I would describe that is remembering that your internal beliefs are stronger than your external circumstances. No matter what your external circumstances look like currently, if you hold belief that your circumstances are going to be better than what they were while in the relationship, that is what you will go out and create. And that is where commitment and determination is fueled from. Like that was like the biggest thing that I took away from my personal experience and what I teach my clients is that I was determined. I was like, there is no way I'm living a life that is less than what I had with my ex. I just refused. And that fueled so much commitment and so much determination that I went out and created a life that was better than the one that I had with my ex. So even if the logistics feel confusing or complicated or hard or difficult, remember that those are your external circumstances and they're not stronger than your internal belief of yourself. So that's like the first thing that I have to say. And then some kind of like, one of the biggest things for me was the finances. My ex at the time was a dentist. And so he made what I thought at the time was pretty good money.
And now you're kicking his ass.
But I remember just being like so devastated that I just never thought I would be able to like make as much as him. I wouldn't have the same kind of lifestyle. I remember telling myself that my expenses were about to double because I went from living with him to living on my own, moving from a small town to Chicago. And so I was just like, how am I ever going to like live the same kind of lifestyle without him?
Yeah.
If my expenses doubled and all this stuff. And so something really fascinating that came up was it was never really like my expenses doubling. It was just my income decreased. If my income could go up while I was in a partnership with someone, that means it's subject to double in any other circumstance. So who am I to like, why do I think I have a cap on how much I could make? And that's when I started learning all of the thought work, everything that we teach now around money and how we can change our thinking to create more money and how value creates money versus time and all of that stuff. Yeah. And so I think that's really fascinating too, because speaking of uncertainty, it's like from that breakup, I had to learn all about that. I had to like learn all of, and I might have never learned that if I had stayed in the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's helped me create money in ways that I just didn't even know were possible. Yeah. But again, it was all fueled behind the idea that I was determined to make my life better than the one that I had in that relationship. And I'm always going to do that. So no matter like what relationship I'm in, I'm always going to be striving for a life better than the one that I had yesterday. Not from a place of lack or it has to be better, it needs to be better, but from a place of like, oh my gosh, I love where I'm at. And it's so much fun to like, just see what's possible.
Love it.
And then also one other thing that you had mentioned that I think is important to bring up for anyone who's co-parenting, because I think that is a topic that comes up for a lot of breakup coaches or heartbreak coaches is this idea around the no contact rule.
Oh, sure.
And I kind of like, I want to put that to rest for just a second.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I was recently quoted in an article about the no contact rule. And I didn't actually say like, yeah, the no contact rule works, but that was basically the point of the article.
Oh no.
Anyway.
And I'm not going to say that the no contact rule doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It's just how, like, the way that I would describe this is, I have a colleague who's a stop binge eating coach. Mm-hmm. And her and I talk about this all the time, but it's like, if you're binge eating, yes, you could remove all of the food that you binge on from the house. And then you have to go to the store to get it, which puts a layer of, right. It's still there, but it puts a layer in between you and the food. Mm-hmm. However, don't you want to get to the point where you have the food in the house and then you just no longer have the desire to binge?
Right.
And so the same thing is to be said about your ex and, the situation that you're going through with that. And then of course, the added layer of co-parenting that sometimes makes it impossible. So it's go ahead, do the no contact rule. If it's working, awesome, cool, amazing. But it is not required to get over your ex. It is not a prerequisite, right? You might say, right? And when it comes to co-parenting, I think the biggest thing to think about is redefining your relationship. And the way that I like to do that with my clients is like pick an idol of yours. Like when I think about a girlfriend, I'm like, I want to be Beyonce or Beth from This Is Us. I don't know if anyone watches This Is Us, but there's a woman on there named Beth. She's fire. But very, very strong Beyonce vibes of like, if I'm going to be a wife, I want to be like a Beyonce wife who's just like together, backs her husband up, all the things just like that's what I would have in my mind. So when I think about if I were to go through like a divorce and I have a parent with that, or I'm a parent with my significant other, how would that look like? How would that person handle that situation? How would that person show up? What would she do in distress? What does she do when her ex shows up and does this? Or how does that person handle it? And I like to think about it from that perspective and just kind of compare and figure out how I might do that different.
I love that. I do that too. And I think the idea of picking an actual person or character that's out there that you look up to is an example of what's possible that we sometimes have a hard time finding within ourselves in a moment of challenge. And the other thing I sometimes try to do for myself and suggest to my clients is imagine the highest version of yourself. Mm-hmm. Imagine the version of yourself that just, is totally on point, that is living life exactly as you want to be living it, like, what would you do then? What would
Love
this
that.
be like then?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things about like, dealing with navigating the very real, quote unquote, real material consequences of ending a relationship is that we often make them so much harder than they need to be. And we have so many stories about like, like what divorce means for kids and like what it means to like separate finances. And all of these stories are grounded in scarcity and lack. And I think, this is like an area of our lives where we really have to be able to step back and be able to say, like, do I have to believe this is true for me? And this is, as you well know, this is why working with a coach is so helpful.
Perspective.
Yeah.
And this might be too out there for your listeners. I don't really know if your audience is this like woo woo.
I can't wait to hear this.
But one thing that comes to mind when you talk about that, especially when like there's kids involved and other humans involved in what's happening, is the way that I think about us. Again, this is very woo woo, so you guys can take it or leave it. But I believe that I'm a soul within the human body. And that means as a soul, I came to earth in this human iteration and I picked out my journey and I picked out my parents. I picked out the journey that I wanted. And that's kind of like the game that's happening. And when other people are suffering or when other people are in pain, I always constantly have to go back and remind myself, like, that's the journey they chose. Not in a way like, you chose this journey and like, you should be, it's like, oh, they're going through that turmoil. And who am I to say that that's not going to be the best thing that's ever happened to them?
Exactly.
Because I think my breakup was the best thing that ever happened to me. But if someone would have come to me 6 months after the breakup and been like, it's the best thing that ever happened to you, I might have slapped them in the face.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
But at the same time, it's like when you think about your kids and if your kids are having to go through the divorce, like there's lots of different thought patterns that you get to choose from and lots of different feelings and lots of different reasons that you can have behind that. And I'm a child of a relationship where the parents stayed together because they wanted to stay together for the kids. And it wasn't like, I wouldn't change it because that's who I am now, but I feel like that was really unnecessary. And I saw a lot of dysfunction and maybe things might have been different if I grew up with a different kind of situation, which again, I don't need to change any of it. That's totally fine. But a lot of people, you can see pros and cons to either side of those things. And that's how not just co-parenting, but that's how everything in life works, is there's always going to be two sides to that.
Totally. I mean, so two things to that. One is, I'm a sociologist by training. I used to teach sociology of the family classes. The idea that parents splitting up is bad for kids is not true. It's not borne out empirically. I know, quote unquote, scientists will tell you that it is, but don't even get me started on that. Point number two is as you alluded to, the point of being human is not to never experience challenge or discomfort or uncertainty or any other flavor of difficulty, quote unquote. It's nobody, nobody ever said that was the plan.
Yes.
But especially in the United States, we just kind of think that that's how it works. Challenges are bad. Heartbreak is bad.
Right. I'm so glad you said that too, because I think that's a whole other, I'm not a mom yet, but I will be. And I think it's so fascinating that as parents, we never want our kids to experience negative emotion.
Yeah.
But yet what a beautiful time to teach them about emotions and teach them how to handle emotions differently from maybe how you have in the past. And I can't knowing this information, I'm so excited to teach my daughter about emotions. I cannot wait.
Right. Exactly. I tell people this all the time, what if, phrase it as a question, what if the greatest gift you could give your kids is to show them that however they feel is okay, and you're there to respect their feelings and let them feel their feelings, and to model for them that it's okay to have difficult emotions and you don't have to blame other people for them, or, it's part of the human experience and it's not a problem. It's not a bad thing.
Oh, I love that. Gives me chills.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah. Okay. So I know we kind of touched on this. No, we talked about how the idea from healing heartbreak just takes time is not really how it works.
Yeah, no, time has nothing to do with it, right? Just because I think, we got in this pattern of looking retrospectively and looking towards our external circumstances to determine what we believe internally. And so I think the whole theme of it just takes time to heal came from people living their life unintentionally.
Yeah.
And then recognizing like, oh, that's why that didn't happen, is because this was supposed to happen. And you can think about this with jobs, like you've applied to a bunch of jobs and then you didn't get the first two that you applied to, but then you found out the third or fourth one was like exactly what you needed and it was so much better. And you're like, oh, that's why I didn't get the first two. And so instead of looking retroactively, thinking that happens by chance, just deciding that those things happen for a reason every single time, it's always happening for you and not to you.
Yeah.
And then that way you don't have to wait for time to pass to make those conclusions. You can just decide now and commit to those new beliefs and practice them.
Yeah. I love it. All right, Dorothy. As you know, this podcast is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity. So can you tell us about a time when you have been unfaithful to someone, maybe yourself or another person, or to something?
Yeah. So I have been unfaithful in multiple relationships. I have no shame in sharing that. I've definitely cheated multiple times in multiple different relationships. So I think it was a beautiful thing that I've done that, only because I've learned how much I don't enjoy it from both perspectives, right? Being unfaithful in terms of a relationship was really hard, like hiding a secret, the shame that I had around it, the guilt that I had around it, and what I made that mean about myself as a person. And so I really had to learn how to let that go and recognize just because I've done that once doesn't mean that that's who I am forever. And it's really helped. I also am like so grateful that it happened when it did, because now as I'm venturing forth in new relationship, it's really easy and clear for me to say, hey, that's not the kind of relationship that I want.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a relationship with multiple people. I genuinely just want it to be you and I. And it's easier for me to set that boundary and stand in my own power with it. And recognize that also if it does happen to me, like where someone does cheat on me, again, it has nothing to do with me and I can disagree with the behavior, but still move forward from it from a calm way and still love that person dearly and know that it also doesn't have everything to do with them either. Like that doesn't define them. Really think I'm glad you're talking about this because it's just, I've learned so much from all of the experiences that I've had around it. And one of the biggest things is recognizing that it's an action, just like any other action. Like it's just as, I'm eating an ice cream and I would cheat it.
Right.
They're all actions.
Just so everyone who doesn't understand like coach speak gets this. What I think you mean is anything that happens is neutral until we give it meaning. It doesn't have inherent non-negotiable meaning to it.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to mean whatever, you were talking about this earlier, but it doesn't have to mean what everyone else wants to make it mean.
Right.
But
absolutely.
Yeah. So I learned a lot from my experience of being unfaithful. I'm grateful for the experience and I learned a lot.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think, this is a whole other podcast episode in and of itself, but one of the points you make is really important. It's not like if you cheat, you're going to be a cheater forever. The whole myth of like, once a cheater, always a cheater, wait for it, just isn't true.
Yeah. Right. 100%.
Yeah.
And you learn so much about yourself in that experience and you really have to show up. I feel like at least in that specific scenario, you have to show up as your own best friend because that's when you need you most.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And that is why I do what I do. And on that note, thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and learn more about you and your work?
Yes, absolutely. So love hanging out on Instagram at Breakup Coach Dorothy. I also have a podcast called How to Get Over Your Ex. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you're welcome to join us there with all of the fellow Braveheart. And then if you want any other information, you can head on over to my website at dorothyabjohnson.com.
Awesome. Thanks again, Dorothy. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, we hope you'll head on over to iTunes to rate and review the show. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.